Hello everyone, I hope you're well. This evening I want to talk to you about some of the themes that we talked about last time. In particular, I want to talk about Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, the Milesians, the first philosophers in the Western tradition. As we talked about last time, these three philosophers were united both because they asked the same metaphysical questions and because they were committed to the same epistemological methodologies. In their metaphysical questions, all three of those philosophers were committed to the question, what are all things? That is, they took that to be the central metaphysical question that needed to be answered. They were also committed to the same sort of epistemology. That is, they were interested in giving reasons and justifications for their views. And prior to these three philosophers, as we talked about in class, many of the explanations that were given were stories that appealed to religious doctrines, appealed to gods, appealed to things that could not be proven, neither verified nor falsified. And so Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes are important because they really moved away from these supernatural explanations and gave explanations in purely naturalistic terms. And that's the reason why they're known as material monists. Material because they all agreed that the fundamental stuff of the universe, the arche, as it is in the ancient Greek, that is the basic element or foundation of the universe, they all agreed that that was a material thing, a matter. And they were monists because they all agreed that it was one thing. They were not pluralists, did not think there were many things, but just one. So as we talked about, Thales was the first of these three philosophers, and he held the view that all things are water. This view is significant because it asks the question, as we've seen, what underlies all things, or what are all things? And this answer presupposes that there is some answer or other to this question. And so Thales assumed that not only would he ask this question, but that there is an answer and indeed one answer to this question. There is some one shared property of all things in the world. So we see in his view a kind of simplification or reduction, an attempt to understand or explain all things in terms of one thing or one kind of thing. And of course, for Thales, that one kind of thing he thought was water. We've already looked at some of the justification for this view that he gave. For example, water nourishes all things, or the seeds of all things are moist. Of course, Thales lived on the Aegean Sea, and at that time, of course, water was somewhat in scarce supply. Seawater was not something that, of course, you could drink, and so water was not taken for granted, but was taken to be a really important part of life. And so that's yet another reason why Thales thought that all things were water. Thales also held the view that the soul, or the psyche in Greek, is the source of motion or the source of an inner power. And so in all of the pre-Socratics, we have some attention to the issue of change, some attention to the question of how we can account for change. And this focus on change, the need to explain change, we're going to see recur when we talk about Aristotle later on in the term. So after Thales, we have Anaximander. It's thought, although there's some controversy about this, that Anaximander was the student of Thales. Anaximander, however, disagreed with Thales' view that all things are water. He did, however, think that Thales asked the right question, what are all things, or what one property underlies all things, but rather that he got the answer wrong. Anaximander's view is that all things are more sophisticated than can simply be accounted for by one thing like water. And so he holds that all things are a boundless thing. The Greek word for this is apeiron. So the arche, the basic element of the universe, is apeiron, a boundless thing. So the original material or matter, the fundamental principle of the universe, is this apeiron, this indefinite thing. Anaximander was also the first to posit the view that there are laws that govern the physical world. To help make these laws more understandable, he used models. And so, as we talked about in class, he was thought to have drawn the first map. He also had a rudimentary view of evolution. Having studied fossils, he believed that the earth had changed over the ages and that higher forms of life, like humans, might have come from lower forms of life. For example, he thought humans might have come from sharks. Anaximander was also interested in opposites. And so one of the problems with Thales' view, for example, that all things are water, is how you can explain what it means for something to be dry. On Thales' view, the way you would explain dryness is that dryness would be ceasing to be. But if this is the case, then matter cannot be one thing to the exclusion of its opposite, because you have water and then you have dryness. And if water is one thing and dryness is ceasing to be, then dryness doesn't exist. So given this argument, Anaximander concluded that the concept of matter needs to be more complicated than Thales' simplistic view that all things are water, and he concludes that all things are a boundless, neutral, indeterminate thing. So I want to look at just a couple of fragments from Anaximander. This is fragment 9. It says, "Of those who declare that the arche, or the basic element or principle, is one, moving, and apeiron, the boundless indefinite, Anaximander said that the apeiron was the arche, and the element of things that are. And he was the first to introduce this name for the arche, that is, he was the first to call the arche apeiron. He says that the arche is neither water, nor any of the other things called elements, but some other nature which is apeiron, out of which come to be the heavens and the worlds in them. The things that are perish into the things from which they come to be, according to necessity, for they pay penalty and retribution to each other for their injustice in accordance with the ordering of time, as he says in rather poetical language." And this fragment is from Simplicius. And you can see again in that fragment, as we also saw with Thales, that there are still some explanations relying on gods and relying on these forces, these supernatural forces in the universe. So both Thales and Anaximander continue to rely on those supernatural forces in some of their explanations. They have not fully shed the ways of the past, as we saw with Hesiod. One other fragment that I wanted to look at in Anaximander were some of his fragments concerned with evolution. So he has this rudimentary view of evolution, for example, in fragment 18. And this is from Aetius. Anaximander says that the first animals were produced in moisture, enclosed in thorny barks. When their age advanced, they came out onto the drier part. Their bark broke off, and they lived a different mode of life for a short time. One other fragment about evolution is fragment 19. He also declares that in the beginning humans were born from animals of a different kind, since other animals quickly manage on their own, and humans alone require lengthy nursing. For this reason they would not have survived if they had been like this at the beginning. And once again, fragment 20. Anaximander believed that there arose from heated water and earth either fish or animals very like fish. In these, humans grew and were kept inside as embryos up to puberty. Then finally they burst, and men and women came forth, already able to nourish themselves. So in these fragments we see the explanation of these natural phenomena. How is it that human beings could possibly survive when our offspring, our infants, require such significant care for such a long time? And so in these fragments we see Anaximander attempting to give an explanation for this problem. Following Anaximander, the last of the material monists, the last of the Milesians, was Anaximenes. Anaximenes was thought to be a student of Anaximander, Like Thales and Anaximander, Anaximenes was a material monist. He thought that one thing underlies all of what matter is. He also thought that this one thing was what he called air, spelled A-E-R, kind of like air, the stuff that we breathe, but more vague. Though it is less vague than Anaximander's boundless indefinite, or apeiron. And Anaximenes also had an explanation for how air is transformed into everything else. He says that these changes, these transformation, come in changes in density, in condensation or rarefaction of the air. So that enables us to explain really solid things and liquid things and gaseous things. Now, Anaximenes, unlike his Milesian predecessors, does shed all mythological ways, not discussing gods or psyches or powerful forces in the universe that lack naturalistic explanations. But Anaximenes relies only on mechanical causes to explain the changes in nature. So I'll read just a couple of passages, a couple of fragments. First, fragment 21. Anaximenes, like Anaximander, declares that the underlying nature is one and unlimited, but not indeterminate, as Anaximander held, but definite, saying that it is air. It differs in rarity and density according to the substances it becomes. Becoming finer, it comes to be fire. Being condensed, it comes to be wind, then cloud. And when still further condensed, it becomes water, then earth, then stones, and the rest come to be from these. He too makes motion eternal and says that change also comes to be through it. And then one other fragment from Anaximenes is fragment 29. Anaximenes stated that clouds occur when the air is further thickened. When it is condensed still more, rain is squeezed out. Hail occurs when falling water freezes, and snow when some wind is caught up in the moisture. So again, in this fragment, we have naturalistic explanations of naturalistic phenomena, and that's really what is unique and distinctive about the Milesians and the material monists, as they're also known as. So finally, just to bring this to a close, I want to look ahead briefly and just mention that next time we're going to be studying the Pythagoreans and Heraclitus. Both of those groups, the Pythagoreans and Heraclitus, are interested in explaining change, just as the material monists, the Milesians, were. And they're also interested in explaining what the basic stuff of the universe is, although this is less important to Heraclitus than it is to the Pythagoreans. The Pythagoreans are forerunners of the philosophical school of rationalism, just as the material monists are forerunners of the philosophical school of empiricism. So look on my website, on Lyceum, for a couple of questions for you to post blogs in response to. And I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Thanks.